For many years, Greg Mathis was seen as one of television's most recognizable voices of accountability. On his courtroom show, he often spoke passionately about responsibility, personal growth, and the importance of family. His authority didn't come only from legal experience. It came from a life story that audiences found powerful. Mathis had once lived a difficult life in Detroit, surrounded by crime and instability. Yet he rebuilt himself, eventually becoming a respected judge and media personality. That transformation became central to the way viewers understood him. When he spoke about second chances, people believed him. When he warned others about consequences, it felt authentic because he had faced those consequences himself. But like many public figures, the life viewers saw on television was only part of the story. Behind the cameras existed the private world of his marriage to Linda Mathis, a relationship that had lasted nearly 4 decades. Their partnership appeared steady and supportive, often described by Mathis himself as the foundation of everything he had built. Yet in 2024, news of a divorce filing revealed that even the strongest public images can hide struggles that few outsiders ever notice. The relationship between Greg and Linda began long before television fame. They married in June 1985, years before the courtroom show made Mathis a household name. During those early years, his life was still stabilizing after a difficult past. Building a professional reputation required relentless work and determination. Through that period, Linda remained beside him as a partner in both the practical and emotional sense. As his career progressed, the couple raised 4 children together while managing the pressures of an increasingly visible life. Publicly, they presented the picture of a balanced family. Interviews and appearances often highlighted the idea that their marriage had survived the same challenges that affect many couples: financial pressure, long work hours, and the responsibilities of raising children. For viewers, the story seemed reassuring. It suggested that stability was possible even after a troubled past. Over time, their relationship became part of the larger narrative surrounding Greg Mathis himself. He often credited his family for giving him the motivation to keep moving forward. In many ways, Linda represented the quiet strength behind the public success that millions of viewers associated with his name. For decades, their marriage appeared steady from the outside. Public appearances, family photographs, and occasional interviews reinforced the idea that the Mathis household was grounded in shared values. Unlike many celebrity relationships that become the subject of frequent headlines, theirs remained largely private. That privacy helped maintain the impression of stability. When Greg Mathis spoke about discipline and loyalty on television, audiences assumed those same principles defined his home life. It was an image that carried weight because it matched the broader redemption story people admired. A man who had overcome adversity and built a successful career seemed to embody the lessons he shared with others. But relationships often contain complexities that cannot be captured by public appearances alone. Behind any long-lasting partnership are years of adjustments, compromises, and emotional effort that outsiders rarely see. As time passed, the demands of career and public life increased. Long hours, travel, and the pressure of maintaining a public reputation became a normal part of Greg's routine. While the marriage continued outwardly unchanged, the balance that had once supported their partnership was gradually shifting. By the early months of 2024, the strain within the relationship had reportedly grown more difficult to ignore. There was no single dramatic moment that immediately brought problems into the spotlight. Instead, it appeared to be a gradual accumulation of emotional distance. Linda later explained that the challenges in their marriage were not defined by one argument or event. Rather, they developed over years as responsibilities and expectations slowly changed. Supporting a partner's career for decades can sometimes require personal sacrifices that are easy to overlook at the time. Over the years, Linda had managed many aspects of family life, while Greg focused intensely on his professional commitments. That arrangement worked for a long time, but eventually it began to feel unbalanced. As months passed, the quiet tension between personal fulfillment and long-standing routine became harder to ignore. By mid-2024, the couple reached a point where space seemed necessary. On July 17 of that year, Linda identified a separation date in legal documents, marking a moment when the private difficulties of their marriage became impossible to ignore. The decision to separate did not initially become a public spectacle. In many ways, it reflected something deeply personal rather than dramatic. After decades of marriage, stepping away from daily life together was not about revenge or public attention. It was about reflection. Linda's perspective, as later shared in interviews, focused on the emotional toll of carrying responsibilities that had accumulated over years. Maintaining a household, raising children, and supporting a partner's demanding career can gradually create a sense of imbalance if communication begins to fade. While Greg's work required long days and constant focus, Linda often handled the quieter responsibilities that kept family life functioning. Over time, the emotional distance between those roles began to grow. By the summer of 2024, the couple found themselves confronting questions about whether the relationship still provided the support both people needed. The separation was an attempt to create space for those questions. For the public, however, the situation soon became much more visible than either of them had expected. On August 22, 2024, Linda formally filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. The legal language was straightforward, but the meaning behind it represented years of unresolved tension. Divorce filings often reduce complex emotional histories into a few lines of paperwork. In this case, those lines signaled the possible end of a partnership that had lasted almost 40 years. News of the filing quickly reached media outlets and social platforms. For viewers who had followed Greg Mathis for decades, the announcement came as a surprise. The marriage had long been part of the narrative surrounding his success. Suddenly, the story seemed uncertain. While legal documents outlined the procedural details, separation date, support requests, and other formalities, the deeper story remained largely private. What was clear, however, was that both individuals were confronting a turning point in their lives. The situation raised broader questions about the challenges long-term relationships face when careers, public expectations, and personal needs evolve over time. As the news circulated online, speculation followed quickly. Social media discussions often fill information gaps with assumptions, and this situation was no exception. Rumors about possible affairs or other conflicts began appearing across different platforms, even though many of those claims were never confirmed. For public figures, moments of personal difficulty frequently become subjects of intense public curiosity. Greg Mathis had spent decades speaking about accountability and personal responsibility on television. Because of that reputation, people naturally wondered how those values applied to his own life. Yet the reality of a marriage is rarely as simple as a single headline or rumor. Relationships are shaped by years of shared experiences and challenges that outsiders cannot fully see. While public discussion continued online, the couple themselves focused on understanding the deeper issues that had developed within their relationship. Behind the scenes, conversations were taking place that would ultimately shape the direction of their future. For Greg Mathis personally, the divorce filing reportedly triggered a period of deep reflection. He had faced many challenges earlier in life, including legal trouble during his youth and the long journey toward rebuilding his reputation. Yet the possibility of losing his marriage created a different kind of emotional impact. A long-term partnership can become an anchor that provides stability through every stage of life. When that anchor feels uncertain, it forces a person to reconsider priorities and decisions made over many years. During this period, Greg began acknowledging that the intense focus required by his career may have contributed to emotional distance at home. The long hours that once helped him build a successful future eventually became routine. Over time, routine can quietly replace connection if it goes unquestioned. Recognizing that possibility was difficult but necessary. It marked the beginning of a conversation about accountability that was far more personal than anything discussed in a courtroom. Therapy and honest conversation soon became central parts of the process. For couples who have shared decades together, resolving conflict often requires revisiting patterns that developed slowly over time. Both Greg and Linda began discussing the emotional imbalance that had grown within their marriage. Linda described feeling that she had carried many responsibilities quietly while Greg focused on professional demands. Her decision to seek divorce, she later explained, was not primarily about anger, but about reclaiming personal space and emotional well-being. These conversations were not easy. After years of routine, confronting long-avoided feelings can be uncomfortable and emotionally intense. However, they also created an opportunity for understanding that had been missing for some time. Instead of approaching the situation as a battle, the couple began examining how their relationship had evolved and what changes might be necessary if it were to continue. During these discussions, Greg publicly acknowledged that mistakes had occurred during the marriage. Admitting personal shortcomings can be especially difficult for someone known for giving advice and judgments to others. Yet acknowledging those mistakes became an important step toward rebuilding trust. Linda emphasized that the deeper issue was not a single incident, but the gradual absence of emotional presence over the years. When communication fades, even strong relationships can begin to feel distant. Addressing that reality required honesty from both sides. Rather than focusing solely on past disappointments, the couple began discussing how their future could look different if they continued together. This shift from blame toward understanding gradually changed the direction of their conversations. Instead of moving closer to permanent separation, they started exploring the possibility of rebuilding their partnership in a healthier way. The process of rebuilding trust rarely happens quickly. For Greg and Linda, it involved reevaluating everyday habits that had defined their relationship for years. Communication became more intentional, and time together was no longer treated as an afterthought. They began focusing on smaller daily interactions rather than relying on the assumption that decades of shared history would automatically hold the marriage together. This shift required patience and humility from both individuals. Reconciliation does not erase past difficulties, but it can create an opportunity to move forward with greater awareness. Over time, the conversations that had once seemed impossible became part of a new routine. The focus was no longer on preserving an image, but on strengthening the relationship itself. Eventually, the divorce process was quietly halted. The legal separation had lasted only a few weeks, yet the emotional impact extended far beyond that period. For the couple, choosing reconciliation did not mean returning to the past exactly as it had been. Instead, it meant acknowledging the damage that had occurred and deciding to rebuild with greater honesty. Friends and observers noted that the decision seemed less about protecting reputation and more about addressing the deeper needs within the relationship. After nearly 40 years together, both Greg and Linda understood the significance of their shared history. That history did not guarantee success, but it provided a foundation worth reconsidering. When the couple later appeared together publicly, they spoke about the experience with surprising openness. Greg described the separation as one of the most difficult periods of his life, comparing the emotional impact to the grief he felt after losing his mother. For him, the marriage represented stability through every stage of his personal transformation. Linda's perspective highlighted the importance of self-respect and personal boundaries within long-term relationships. She explained that choosing herself did not necessarily mean abandoning the marriage. Instead, it meant insisting that her needs be recognized as well. These reflections resonated with many viewers who had experienced similar challenges in their own relationships. Their children also played an important role during the difficult period. Family members watched the situation unfold under intense media attention, something few families experience during private conflicts. Despite that pressure, they supported their parents' efforts to communicate honestly and find a path forward. For them, the reconciliation was meaningful not because it restored an ideal image, but because it demonstrated that real change was possible. In many ways, the experience strengthened family bonds by encouraging more open conversations about expectations, respect, and emotional presence. Today, the story of Greg and Linda Mathis offers a reminder that even relationships that appear stable from the outside can face hidden challenges. Fame, career pressure, and long-standing routines can slowly create emotional distance if communication fades. Yet their experience also shows that honest reflection and willingness to change can sometimes rebuild what seemed broken. Instead of presenting their marriage as perfect, they now speak about it as a relationship that required effort and growth. In that sense, the story reflects a broader truth about long-term partnerships. Redemption, the theme that has always defined Greg Mathis's life story,